Welcome. So the topic tonight is about risk, trust, and well-being. And the idea being that one of the things that we often try to do with our mind is eliminate risk from life. We try to find ways to make it so that life seems less risky, or we enter into bargaining kind of agreements with life or with ourselves or with others in order to try to minimize risk. And it is impossible to eliminate risk. So maybe that would be a better way to say it. So we enter into these agreements, or we try to do these things to eliminate risk, because we can decrease risk sometimes. And it's actually somewhat smart to do that. It's somewhat smart to think about, like, hey, is this a really problematic situation that I'm getting myself into? Maybe I don't want to do that. Maybe I want to approach things a little bit differently and to take like deliberate action to minimize or to avoid unnecessary risk. But the overall question of, can we have a safe passage? And, what your response to that is, the yes or the no of it, like, oh no, I know we can't have a safe passage, or, oh, I'm hoping that if I figure it out, I'll be able to find a way that I can beat life at her own game. That if you look at that, chances are you can find operating inside of yourself a desire, if not just a desire, kind of a pattern, a program, a way of acting, a thought process or two, that believes that or wants to ensure safety. And the easiest way that we can do this is simply by seeing where we find victimhood. So if you look at the part of your life where you're like, I can't believe that happened, and it shouldn't have happened to me, then you can probably root around in that area, and rooting around in that area, find like the part of you that would wants to believe that like life is right when there are not risks, or when there is not the result of, like, when there is not pain, when there's not suffering, when there's not problem. So when we take a look at this part, this kind of like the part of us that maybe believes that pain and suffering and difficulty really should not be a part of life. For example, if we do more personal development work, or we become more spiritual, or we act a certain way, or we're always, we go to church on Sunday, or whatever it is that we're going to do, that then is going to decrease the amount of pain, suffering, or difficulty that we experience in life. So when we start to like kind of dial in that we're in this bargaining agreement, and that we often feel upset, dismayed by when life tells us that we're kind of barking up the wrong tree, and hands us out another challenge. And so when we approach life trying to manage this way, and we're like, we start to have a relationship to risk that is unhealthy, meaning we try as little as possible to take risks. And this is something that's often seen, it's something that often grows with age. So if you think about your own life, chances are when you were younger, you were a kid or a teenager, you might have noticed that like certain types of risks you were willing to take, like, or you were willing to be like, I'm doing it anyway, I don't care what the outcome is, kind of attitude. And then as you kind of bump up against life and start to feel the pain of life and the different things that happen along the way, we start to develop strategies. And some of those strategies are very productive and constructive. They allow us to eliminate certain unnecessary risks in our life. That's what I was talking about before. But then they become kind of calcified. They become patterns that are that like we start to believe, or like starts to get written into them, that if I do this pattern, then this, like, I shouldn't experience this kind of pain. Or if I do this type of pattern, if I do this thing in my life, act this way, do this thing, then, you know, it's like life should be safe. And then when it's not, then we say, oh, there must be something wrong with that pattern. Maybe that pattern wasn't a healthy one, or maybe I don't know anything, or we get frustrated. Am I ever going to see anything different than what it is that I see now? I've tried all the things. I created these new behaviors, and these new behaviors are not yielding the safety and lack of pain that I hoped that they would yield. And so maybe there's something wrong with me, or maybe I haven't figured it out, or whatever it is. And so, but the problem in this situation is that we're not quite equating, we're not quite looking at the situation in a clear way, because life has a certain amount of pain and suffering that is going to come with it. There's a certain amount of risks that are sort of unavoidable, or there's a certain amount of, there's a certain amount of things coming our way that are unavoidable. So as a squirrel, you could be the best at running across the road for a good portion of your life. And in that, you could make it across the road many, many times. And then, you have that time where your timing isn't quite, you could say, isn't quite right, but it's like, it's just different. And, and there's a problem. There happens to be a car coming at that particular point in time. And I'm not really making an argument for chance here. What I'm making an argument for, or what I'm speaking about, is that that even if we have a pattern that's established, that we have learned, doesn't result in, it sometimes decreases pain and suffering. It is not a surefire way to decrease suffering, but we kind of come up with a little bit of amnesia there, and start to feel like if we just repeat these patterns that have been effective in sort of mitigating risk, then we'll keep eliminating more and more risk. We'll get more and more positive result and less problems in life. And so what I'm trying to build out is what a relationship is to the difficult side of life, that puts us into sort of a false relationship with what is, through believing that we can replicate a certain pattern in order to make sure that life runs well. I'm not saying that patterns don't result in certain outcomes a good amount of the time. I'm just saying that we cannot avoid pain and suffering inside of life simply through the execution of patterns. And to start to believe that is to start to get a little disconnected from reality. In order to accept life on life's terms, right, there is a certain amount of pain and suffering, and ultimately death is a part of life. Like there's no avoidance from that. The change is how we relate to it, but there's not an ability to make it a safe passage. So when people start to get close to this, one of the things that I see happen is then they say, oh my gosh, well, like, how do I find security if I know that on one level, we can approach things from various different directions, but on one level, I can't actually protect myself from a certain amount of things that might come my way in the course of life, that I have to be willing to risk, that I need to have the courage to face these things, and then the tools and ability to work with what comes my way. So we kind of like work more on resiliency, right, than risk prevention. But so work on resiliency. So then, okay, now that I kind of get this, what is it? What do I do? How do I find trust? Where do I find trust? Where do I place my trust? What gives me a sense of bearings if it's not my patterns that I'm in, like I'm thinking I can exchange for a safe passage? Then what actually provides me with that resiliency and the ability to work with what is? And so, way that I like to approach this, or one of the ways that I like to approach this, is that the higher, the more complete the energetic is that we're attuning to, aligning with, connecting with, putting our trust in, the more energetic consistency there is. So if you go to ultimate source energy, right? Source energy, we'll say, is like as complete as we can get. And so there's as much energetic consistency as possible. And therefore, we are able to connect with that, put our trust in that in a way that we can't put our trust in something that is more transient. And that is true across the energetic spectrum. So we have like the one, the all, right? And then we have various different levels of the energetic spectrum, all the way down to the very changeable, malleable physical existence. Depending on what we're focused on, kind of depends on the level of like consistency, the level of strength it's going to have. So like we all know that if we put our trust in a superficial aspect of our personality, very likely life will disrupt it at some point in time. But if we put our trust in ourselves, in like our core values, then we're going to be able to have more of the ability to have resilience and to move through life. So similarly, you can build that kind of spectrum out. So we could put our trust in the things that are most consistent and in the quality of what those are. So we're trusting in like the continuity, like we can trust in the continuity of the way that the air functions. We can trust in the continuity of ways certain archetypal energies move. And we can trust in the fundamental goodness, the foundation of like the source energy, even though we can find all different other things that are in the mix. So trust from this perspective, and like how we navigate all the things that are coming in life, comes from this understanding of like what has more energetic consistency, and like knowing that basically everything besides what has the most energetic consistency can be disrupted in some way at some point in time. So that's why when people start talking about like enlightenment or inner peace or something like that, it becomes such a deep topic, because we're really getting way, way down into like some deep energetic material in order to be able to hold on to that through line, the energetic through line, something for us to rely on, something for us to ground in, something for us to be connected to, that allows us to move through all of the different elements of life, both fabulous and difficult, and to be able to have a relationship with it that is different than trying to manage like pain, suffering, risk, reward. But in order, kind of like, I'm gonna pause here for like to open up conversation and questions. But the pathway in that I took to this particular concept of the kind of trust and alignment and attunement, as some of you have heard me talk about, the pathway in is through starting to understand this shell, this orientation, this kind of more superficial orientation that most of us live inside of, and that we're seeing in a very powerful way in our world right now, where we're trying to eliminate risk and pain and difficulty, and we're living kind of in the illusion that can be done to such a degree that it is actually creating a significant amount of pain and suffering. And so it's like getting outside of that, I think, is an important thing when we start to take life on its own terms and learn to be courageous. And if we think in terms of like the warrior, or something like that, like the knight going into battle, it's like the banner, it's like that we're holding, like what it is that we're representing, what we're standing with is that higher energetic, and we're going forward into the unknown, which has risk associated with it. and potential pain and suffering, but we're moving forward into that with courage because we know what it is that we're connected to, and what we're connected to has permanence above our sort of like fragile, smaller self. And there's a lot to be learned in that, like perspective, right? Like, so, each opportunity, each situation, like we can take a perspective on it, in order to understand certain things. And so in this one, it's kind of like understanding like what we try to put our faith in, what we try to put what we try to build security out of, and that we can actually become quite adept at like feeling like it creates us security, and then what actually creates a sense of security, a real security and well-being. But it will never look like that, provided we're wanting life to sort of show us a different version, a version where pain and suffering don't happen and risks don't need to be taken if we just do the right thing, grow the right way, figure ourselves out, get rid of all of our wounding and all of that kind of stuff. It's great to see you all, and we will talk again soon.